The hall held too many shadows for a Sunday morning. Wooden benches gathered around the stage, polished from decades of restless hands and spilled mate. Sunlight came through colored glass, pools of blue and red gathering on the floor where children used to play at my mother's feet. The saints on the wall watched as the community filed in, tight-lipped and murmurous. My father stood at the edge, linen shirt pressed but sleeves rolled up, baring his arms as if he meant to wrestle something invisible. Mama sat beside him, nose pinched, the way she did when I practiced my turns in our cramped apartment and knocked over the lamp. It was Maestro Peretti, my uncle on my mother's side, a man whose hair had surrendered to the years but whose voice filled the room, trembling and insistent, who called everyone to order. "Joaquin, come forward." I walked up to that low stage past cousins in pressed skirts, familiar faces lined up in uneven ranks. Andreta wouldn't look at me, her hands twisting the hem of her dress. Miguel smirked, one foot tapping, as if he were about to turn this gathering into a punchline. The abuela who watched me in the afternoons dabbed her eyes, more from mortification than sympathy. Maestro's hand found my shoulder with the weight of expectation. "Tell them," he said, "what you think this city owes you." My tongue felt too big for my mouth, but I swallowed. "I want to dance," I said, each word like a stone thrown into silent water. "I want to study ballet." A quick cough, Mama's chin dropped. The saints on the wall seemed to avert their painted eyes. "Ballet," snorted old Don Vicent, who fixed sinks and lived for the applause at Asados. "You want to wear tights and pirouette, is that it?" A ripple of laughter, it strung like rubbing alcohol in an open cut. Maestro raised a finger, launching into the speech he'd honed for weeks. "We love you, Joaquin, but this is fantasy. We are people of work. Your mother mends linens. Your father builds with his hands. And you," he looked me in the eye, mournful, hopeful, stern, "this is not for people like us." My father's jaw twitched. He said nothing, not then, but the air between us was an iron bar. Mama, in her cracked voice, matriarchal, desperate, whispered, "Why won't you become a teacher? Teach children, maybe, but this ballet is for..." Her gasp trailed off. Andreta hid her face. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was fear, deep, quaking, generational, fear that I'd step outside and the city would eat me. They wanted me safe, working in a place with guardrails and pizza parties and a retirement fund. Not spinning alone in a studio where the mirrors reflected only want. I wanted to scream. I wanted to knock over the lectern, storm out, remind them that some boys broke tables to feel like men, but I'd never asked them to fix the lamps I'd knocked over as I practiced, the bruised fruit of my faith. Instead, I stood, face burning, and gripped the side of the lectern so hard my knuckles turned pale. "You say ballet isn't work," I said, my voice tight, "but I get blisters too, I sweat too. When you build a wall, you stand in the sun until your back aches. So do I, except the sun is a stage light and the ache never fades." They muttered, shifting their feet. Maestro sighed, almost gentle. "Dreams keep us warm, but bread keeps us alive, Hijo." Already they were closing ranks, the benches an unbroken tide pushing me back. I left the hall with rage shaking in my bones. I barely remembered opening the doors or the way the morning air braced against my cheeks. My father did not follow. By sunset, I was kneeling on the roof of our building, watching the city undress for night. Beyond rooftops, Buenos Aires flickered, music and possibility. Down the hall, I heard my parents' voices, hushed and breaking. Mama telling him I'd grow out of it. Papa silent, defeated. I didn't sleep that night or the next. On the third night, I packed my shoes into a duffel bag and walked out. I left a note, "No hey vida sin movimiento," and all the things I didn't know how to say. The years that followed were a kind of exile. I spent dawns on the kitchen floor of boarding houses, stretching until my body rebelled. I rolled coins in my palm for stale medialunas, walked kilometer after kilometer across the city, searching for open doors. Rejection became a language I spoke fluently. Too small, too dark, too stiff, leave us your number. Dance studios with broken heaters, teachers who barely remembered my name. A plump little boy with a crooked smile told me I looked like a scarecrow in a leotard. I tripped him on the next turn. The teacher scolded me, the little boy spat in my shoe. We both kept coming back. When winter set in, I wrapped my feet in torn shirts, swallowing the pain when blisters broke and bled onto rehearsal floors smelling of sweat and talcum. Days blurred, a blur broken only by the prick of hunger, the acid of disappointment. Every month I'd find my courage and write letters home, but no reply ever came. Sometimes I saw Andreta in the city, her arm looped through Miguel's, both of them grown and laughing. She'd greet me with a nervous nod. Miguel never looked my way. I learned loneliness is coldest at midday when the city is awake and you feel most invisible. To matter, even as the fool felt like more than being nothing. But then, one Tuesday, a trembling bit of luck. The director of a small company back from Brazil watched me rehearse and said, "You have something, not grace, ferocity." He offered me a chance, 1 week, unpaid, filling in for an injured soloist. I danced as if I'd never get another. On opening night, the audience was thin, mostly friends and family of the dancers. I stood behind the wings, sweat making rivers down my back, heart pounding a battle march in my chest. The music started Piazzolla, all melancholy and fire, and I stepped onto the stage, blinded by light. Something inside me split open. Every jeer, every ballet is for girls. Every time I was told that real men did not move like this, each wound burned and then cooled, replaced by something clear and sharp. I finished the solo and the applause was polite, but the director's smile, the way he gripped my shoulder after, was the closest thing to home I'd felt in years. And so it began, one gig, then two. The next season I danced in a real theatre, ornate, veiled in plush red, ghosts of long-dead masters breathing from the rafters. The dancers were competitive, tight-lipped, but they watched me now. When the reviews called my movement bold, fierce, unmistakably Argentine, I tore the clipping out and buried it in my sock drawer. Still, success came slow. My community never knew. I'd walk through San Telmo with my head down, the city's grit beneath my nails, my own name still a bitter taste in my mouth. I learned to choreograph, to shape stories with other bodies. I earned enough for a studio, old, drafty, but mine. I taught boys with hungry eyes, girls with knees blackened from slipping, old women who wanted only to remember how their limbs once sang. One spring a letter came, battered and smudged from travel. Mama had written, "Andreita's quinceanera is coming, come if you can stay with us if you want." No more than that, I almost didn't go. I rehearsed the journey 100 times, each ending with some embarrassing collapse, a public rejection, a repeat performance of that day in the hall. But the city never truly left me. Truth be told, I ached for home the way you ache for a tooth you're sure is gone, so I packed my bag, a loose shirt, my best shoes, a scarf against the chill. On the train, the city unspooled outside the window, a changing fresco of memory. I pressed my forehead to the glass. The closer I got, the tighter the air became, as if the city itself pressed in. The neighborhood had changed, new shops, fewer trees, the paint on the church peeling. I made my way up the old steps, heart double timing. Mama met me at the door, thinner, older, but her hands still strong. The hug she gave was stiff, but she did not let go. "You're taller," she said softly, though that was impossible. "You eat enough." I nodded, not trusting myself. The quinceanera was held in the same hall, the one with the saints and the limping benches. The crowd was swollen with acquaintances, neighbors who'd wrung their hands about me, teeters who never missed a baptism, cousins with new babies. A banner sagged above, pink and gold. Andreita sparkled, more woman than child, her eyes sharp and uncertain when she spotted me. She ran to me, arms out, powdered cheeks flushed. "You made it," she said, as if I'd returned from a far and dangerous country. "Wouldn't miss it," I answered, voice rough. Miguel caught my eyes, smirk softer now, uncertainty creeping in. It didn't take long for the gawkers to swarm. "So que tal bailando," said Don Vicent, half smile in place, beer in hand. He nudged his friend. "He came back. Maybe he's learned a trade by now." My father, grayer with a limp, hovered behind Mama, a wall of silence. I felt the heat from all sides, the eyes waiting for me to flinch, to admit I'd failed and come crawling. Maestro Peretti approached, cane tapping. "Have you had enough of your adventures?" Sadness in his eyes, pride curdled into disappointment. "You're still young, there is always work to be found." I inhaled, rage flickered, a slow burn held tight in my stomach, but I let it pass, exhaled. I could see the lines on their faces, the worry that had grown wild in my absence. "Actually," I said, voice steady, "I run my own studio now, in San Telmo. We put on performances in the city, sometimes even teach abroad. I have dancers I choreograph for competitions we enter. We just placed first in a national showcase." Silence, a shifting of feet. Don Vicent grinned, waiting for the punchline. From the side Miguel lobbed, "Sure, but real jobs pay. Not just applause." The words tumbled from somewhere old and sharpened. "Every bill I pay with dance." I handed Miguel a company poster, my name emblazoned, shows listed. There, in the center, a photo. Me mid-leap, feet pointed, body taut, expression fierce. Aunt Lydia took the paper, spectacles slipping down her nose. She read the print aloud, slowly, as if it were a foreign language. Compania de danza joquintors, choreographer y director artistico. Heads leaned in, whispers snaked between benches, Mama's eyes grew wet, and this time not from shame. That's you, she said softly, finger running along the grainy photograph. I nodded, pulse thrumming. The doors banged open. At Mama's urging, I'd arranged something small, half expecting someone to snicker. Now, to the surprise of all, three of my oldest students filed in, their costumes draped over duffel bags. Martina, my stubbornest student, strode forward, unbowed, and grinned at me. You ready? She asked, not caring about the circles forming or the whispers. One moment, I said to my father, would you be in the first row? He hesitated, then nodded. For the first time in years, something between us softened. The students changed in a borrowed classroom. I stood by the side as Martina fastened her hair, hands steady. They're watching, she whispered. You want to lead? No, I said, heart finally thawing. I want them to see what we've built. The lights dimmed, out of practice, someone flicked the wrong switch and a buzz of nervous laughter rose. My students walked on wooden floor, toes barely a whisper. They spread out as I pressed play on the battered stereo. Piazzolla again, but louder, belongs to the streets loud. They moved as I had once dreamed, clean, defiant, every movement tight and elegant. The transitions were seamless. The lines smooth and sinuous. The story mine but now theirs, a boy in shadows, a community doubting the leap, the triumph. People leaned forward. The familiar, practical boys who'd taunted me as a child stood still, jaws slack, staring as my students danced through their skepticism, turning it into beauty. At the crescendo, Martina spun, a burst of defiance, and landed squarely before Don Vicent, her eyes fierce. He startled, then clapped too hard before remembering himself. When it was over, for a moment, no one breathed. Then applause rose, awkward, slow, gaining speed, and just as in that first real theatre, the sound wrapped me in warmth. My father's clap was the loudest, his face unreadable. Mama covered her mouth, tears thick on her cheeks. Afterwards they circled round, shy, uncertain. Where did you teach them to do all that? Are your classes just for girls? You'll come teach here, yes. I took each question, smiled, held my ground. Andreta grinned, pride shining in her eyes. I always knew you'd come back. My father took me outside as the sun slipped down. We stood beside the church, the city humming far off, the air cool. He looked at me, at the edges of me, as if seeing more than the skin and bone. You're stubborn, he said quietly. I learned from the best. He cracked a smile, rare and aching. I was wrong. His hand was rough, but when he set it on my shoulder I felt it, acceptance, not understanding, but enough. Inside they played my students' music again, and children spun around the battered benches, arms high, clumsy and giddy. Mama pressed her head to mine, whispering, You're still my boy, but you've brought us something new. I knew the city outside was still hard, its streets sharp-edged, suspicions thick. There would be others who jeered. But inside that small, time-worn hall, I was finally more than a punchline. That night the doors stayed open long past midnight. Laughter, stories, and the sound of children trying to copy the spins from the stage rose until the stars blinked and the city sighed, as if grateful that, just once, faith had brought someone home.